Hi and welcome to tutorial number 2 using Flash. Today's tutorial is going to be looking at motion tween and shape tween in Adobe Flash. As a reminder, I'm using Adobe Flash CC, the Creative Cloud version of 2014. That being said, if you have the 2017 version, these features will remain consistent across that. On the screen, you'll see exactly where we left off at the end of tutorial 1, where we looked at an introduction to Flash itself, some of the key features, and how to create some keyframes. For today's task, we're just moving straight on. Before we begin, it's important that we know that in Flash, it is able to mathematically calculate the change of objects based on their shape or their movement. And this is the process of tweening. And you'll see if you go to the Insert menu, the options are Motion Tween, Shape Tween, and Classic Tween. Classic Tween is the original version from when Flash was first created, back when it was Macromedia. It is a little bit outdated now. It's still useful and it still does work, but it's a little more difficult to get the process to happen. Whereas Motion Tween and Shape Tween have been created to make it a little bit more user-friendly. Now, Motion Tween is able to move one object from one point to another across a period of frames. Shape Tween gives us the ability to convert a shape from one particular shape to another, again across a period of frames. We're going to start with Motion Tween. Motion Tween is the process of moving an object around. So if we go back to our timeline at the bottom of the screen, I'm going to be working on the circle layer. I'm just going to rename that circle, and in brackets I'm going to say Motion Tween, just so we know exactly what we're working with. And eventually we're going to be using the square layer for Shape Tween. So I'll put that name in there as well. We're working on the circle layer, frame number 1. If we look at frame number 1, we can see our circle and we can see exactly where it's located. And if we look right through to frame 71, where the empty rectangle is, the end of that set of keyframes, it's consistently grey, which means if we move our timeline along anywhere here, the circle doesn't actually move at any point. Now when we get to frame 72 is a brand new keyframe. And when we created this in the last task, we created it from frame number 1. So it is identically placed to frame number 1. So Motion Tween, to begin, all we need to do is click on frame number 1 of our set, go to Insert, and go to Motion Tween. Now it's asking us to convert this to a symbol so that we can tween it, and yes, we want to do that. What that's doing is changing it from a shape into a symbol. This is so that Flash only needs to remember details about where the symbol is located and not the details about its vector file format. So let's click OK there. And you'll notice that my timeline has turned blue right up until frame 71. Now it's important to remember that in motion tweening, it only uses one set of keyframes. It doesn't need to use this brand new keyframe that we had created on frame 72. And you'll notice that this is going to be different for shape tweening, which is why I've pointed out. Once your timeline is blue, that means that that set of frames are ready to be moved, and you can move to any point on your timeline. So I'm going to go right up here to frame number 10, and I can, with my black arrow tool over here, I can click on my circle and move it. You'll now notice that two things. Number 1, I've now got this dotted line appearing on my screen. That's the motion path, and in frame number 10 I now have a black dot. That's to indicate a specific point that the user has input. I can then go to frame 20 and move it again. I've got extended motion path and I've got a second dot. Frame 30, I'm going to move it down again. Frame 40, I'm going to move it slightly sideways. Frame 50, up. Frame 60, down. And frame 71, our final one, I'm going to move it right to here. Now, if you look at the motion path, each of these dots indicates a separate frame, and you have the opportunity to go to any of those frames and you can move it frame by frame. But the benefit of motion tween is it will automatically estimate the difference from the point you have input at the beginning to the point you've input at the end, and evaluate how quickly it needs to move. So you'll see in this first section, the dots are at one consistent distance where it's split that evenly into 10 parts. In the next section, they're a little bit more spread out again as the distance becomes further. And when the distance is closer here in the center, you'll see the dots are closer together, which means the object is going to move slower. So let's go back to frame number 1, and you'll see as I drag it, I've given away the answer there, but it's actually going to enable us to move our object automatically. So press play, you'll see it slows down, speeds up at different points. And finally, when it gets to the very last frame, it returns to the beginning. And that's because in frame 72, we have a separate keyframe which was identical to frame number 1. Now we can avoid that entirely just by either removing that frame or deleting the object on that frame. Now when we play it from frame 1, once I've removed the frame, it disappears entirely because on frame 72, there is nothing on that layer. Congratulations, you've now learnt Motion Tween. It's one of the simple tools that Flash has to offer. The next thing that we're going to show you is Shape Tween. Shape Tween, again, as a reminder, is where we're able to change one shape into another across a specified time span. So on frame number 1, you'll see on our square layer, I'm just going to mute using this button here underneath the eye, the circle layer, so it doesn't distract us. In frame number 1, on the square layer, all I have is a square. And if I drag my timeline all the way across to frame 72, nothing changes. What I'm going to do on frame 72, I'm just going to select this square and delete it. And I'm instead going to draw a circle. And there we go, now I've got a circle. And you'll see that on frame 1, right through to frame 71, it's still a square. As soon as I change to frame 72, it becomes a circle. In order for the Shape Tween to work, we just need to select the first keyframe, and then once we've pressed on that, we hold down the Shift key and select the second keyframe, which is the circle, frame 72. And your timeline should be highlighted yellow now. That means all frames have been selected. We now go to the Insert menu and click Shape Tween. I'm going to click away from that point now, just so that you can see this layer. You'll see that my timeline on the square layer has now turned green, and it has a solid line with an arrow at each end. What that's telling me, green layer, is that I've used the Shape Tween, and the solid line means that it's starting as one shape and finishing as another. So if I press play now, you'll see that Flash has mathematically calculated how the shape is going to change in between frame 1 and frame 72. Now the benefits of our Shape Tween. If I've made a mistake and I decided I don't actually like that circle on frame 72, I can click on it and delete it. You'll notice that my line, my solid line with the arrow that I had, is now actually dotted. And if I press play, nothing happens. The dotted line is indicating that there's a bit of a problem and it doesn't know what it needs to convert the square into. So on frame 72, I can insert any shape that I like. I might pick a hexagon pentagon this time. And if I press play, you'll see it converting into the pentagon. Now there's some other cool things that we can do. Again, on frame 72, let's draw in a couple of different shapes. I'm going to draw in a few different bits and pieces here, there, and everywhere. You might even draw the Mickey Mouse head in. When I press play, you'll notice that Flash has identified that we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 shapes in the final frame and 1 shape in the first frame. So it automatically splits that 1 shape and multiplies it by 8, and each of the individual shapes are then split up into the differing shapes that we can see across the screen. That's how Shape Tween works. You can use that at any time during your animation assessment tasks, as with Motion Tween, and it will add some interactivity and fun to your design. Hope you've learnt a lot, and Have a good night.